Welcome back. Let's continue here now. Gauteng was struck by tremor in the early hours of Sunday morning. The epicentre was in Gauteng's East Rand, but it was felt in the centre of Johannesburg as well as the north and west of the city, and it was felt in Pretoria as well. Are earthquakes becoming more prevalent in South Africa? Well, let's unpack this with Dr. Herman van Niekerk, a senior lecturer in structural and applied geology in the Department of Geology at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Dr. van Niekerk. Now, we understand that there is an investigation about whether or not the mining, caused the latest earthquake. But just talk to us about what could have possibly happened on Sunday morning.
It's very difficult. If you look at where the epicenter is located, it's actually located pretty much under Katlehong, in Alberton, vicinity of Alberton. And it is surrounded towards the north and as well as the west, the east and the northeast by, either active or inactive gold mines. But, what we have seen in South Africa over the last, 50 years or so, if you look at the data, is that there is some mining-induced seismicity, but there might also be real earthquakes that is associated with plate tectonics that is actually happening on the African crust. So it's very difficult to decide, what the real reason is. And there is some research projects undergoing at University of Johannesburg where they are trying to look, for instance, at the earthquake we had in 2014 in the Orkney area, where quite a bit of damage occurred, to try and understand, that whether this was reactivation of very old faults due to stresses from plate tectonic and geological processes, or actual induced by the mining itself.
And now we know this is on record, the strongest earthquake to hit South Africa in years. Are we likely to see them occurring more frequently and, their intensity increasing? I know you're saying there are several studies on the go, but, as I asked in the introduction, are earthquakes becoming more prevalent in South Africa?
I don't think they're becoming more prevalent. If you look at the data, these things do occur, and, they do occur at regular intervals. I think in geological time, they might, become more prevalent, but then, of course, we talk about a span of millions of years. But I don't think they're becoming more prevalent. But I also would just like to say something that people should be very careful at looking at the numbers here. At the moment, this has been classified as a 4.7 on the moment magnitude scale, while the Orkney earthquake of a couple of years ago was at 5.5. And they are not very, you can't just relate them to each other. For instance, the one in Orkney was about 6 times bigger and nearly 16 times stronger, even though it is a 5.5. So worldwide, a 4.7 is not really seen significant. And there's actually quite a number of them happening per hour throughout the world. So, we are just not used to it.
As you're talking about that, and of course, just the sensitivity around the numbers, just talk to us again about what constitutes then an earthquake, it being a seismic activity and all, particularly to what happened on Sunday morning.
Well, again, it's difficult to understand what exactly happened, but typically when earthquakes do occur, they occur around the plate tectonic boundaries of the Earth. Now, I can't go into a geology lecture at the moment, but people can go and have a look, for instance, in the so-called Ring of Fire, around the Pacific Ocean. Earthquakes are very prevalent because plate tectonic boundaries are rubbing against each other. But when you do have stresses in the Earth's crust, and these stresses are built up, at some point something has to give. And it will either move along an old fault line where, you might have had earthquakes in the past, or you might have a new break in the Earth's crust. And the earthquake is the result of the release of all of this energy. And that is then, transmitted through the crust of the Earth as a number of different types of waveforms, which is, of course, what we feel as this energy dissipates from the actual point where it originated, which we call the epicenter.
And And in this case, of course, we know that the epicenter was, in fact, in the East Rand in Boksburg. And I mean, it was felt wildly, even as far as Pretoria, north of the city of Johannesburg, south of the city of Johannesburg, as well as east. Just talk to us about how prepared would you say South Africa is to deal with earthquakes, particularly ones that measure higher on the Richter scale?
I think we are not very well prepared in a certain sense. I think part of the problem is that, especially in the poorer areas, a lot of the construction that is actually happening is not always according to the building regulations. There's building regulations for a reason. And, and that will, of course, cause a lot more damage than when structures are built, according to building regulations. We've seen in the 2014 earthquake that, for instance, a lot of external walls on houses were just single brick walls. So as long as that is allowed to continue, which is, of course, very difficult due to the poverty that we have in the country, we will not be properly prepared if we do ever have a more significant earthquake in sense of damage to poorly built structures. When it comes to high-rise buildings and so forth, if people stick to the guidelines that is out there and the building codes, I think, we are pretty well, in line with being prepared. But there is a danger that we might, if we do ever see something of a magnitude 6 in heavily built up areas, that we might see a lot of damage and some loss of life if we don't carefully try to look at the building codes and how to try and enforce them.
Dr. van Niekerk, let me thank you for your time and coming through to the show this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. Dr. Herman van Niekerk is a senior lecturer in structural and applied geology in the Department of Geology at the University of Johannesburg. Let's continue here now.